I woke up earlier than usual, the Georgia heat already pressing against the windows, though the sun had barely risen. The house was quiet, but my chest carried that heavy hum of unease I couldn't shake. Today was supposed to be the final stretch before my wedding. At 32, I had waited, prepared, worked for this moment, not just the ceremony itself, but the life it represented. My mother used to tell me that a wedding was less about the dress and the flowers, more about the people who showed up and what that said about family. I carried her words with me, yet as I pulled myself from bed and stepped into the day, something told me she might not have recognized the family I was facing. Savannah was a town where appearances lasted longer than truth. A smile at the grocery store masked the gossip that would be repeated by dinner. Weddings here weren't just love stories, they were community theater, and every detail mattered. That was the stage I was walking onto, with my sister Seraphine waiting in the wings. She'd always known how to command the spotlight, whether she deserved it or not. If there was applause to be had, she found her way into the center of it. My fiancé, on the other hand, seemed strangely distant. He gave me the kind of comfort you'd give a child worrying over a storm, pat on the shoulder, quick reassurance, but no real protection from the rain. When I whispered to myself, family can lift you up or tear you down, I wasn't repeating a proverb. I was repeating a warning. Tomorrow was meant to be my happiest day, but cracks had already begun to spread through the surface. I stepped into the bridal suite, expecting calm reassurance, the sight of the dress I had chosen months before. It had been preserved so carefully, steamed and hung in its bag, ready for me to step into tomorrow. My breath slowed when I saw the empty hanger. My stomach turned cold. In its place hung something else, an off-white imitation, with lace unraveling at the sleeves, a zipper that looked one tug away from snapping. I froze, gripping the edge of the table for balance. This wasn't an error a shop could make. This wasn't an accident. The door creaked, and Seraphine appeared, her voice carrying that tone of sweet sympathy she'd perfected. "Oh no, Elowen, don't panic. You'll look fine in this one." She ran her fingers down the cheap fabric as if she were smoothing it into respectability. "This isn't mine," I said, my voice steady though my heart raced. She tilted her head, almost smiling. "Accidents happen. Nobody will notice." Her words dropped like stones. No one will notice. As if my dignity, my choice, my connection to my mother's memory, stitched into that gown, meant nothing. She left as casually as she came, satisfied, her heels clicking against the floor. I swallowed hard, my jaw aching from how tight I clenched it. In that silence, I understood something critical. My anger could betray me if I showed it too soon, so I forced it inward, storing it like a weapon I hadn't yet sharpened. I thought of my mother's nights bent over a sewing machine, her promise that one day I would wear something that felt like my own. This dress, stolen, replaced, wasn't just sabotage. It was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. By mid-morning, the house was buzzing with relatives dropping by, checking on details, asking shallow questions about the ceremony. I held the substitute gown behind closed doors, unwilling to let them see. I thought perhaps I could preserve my dignity, at least until I could sort this mess out. But humiliation has a way of finding you even when you hide. One of my cousins approached with a smirk, waving an invitation. "Hey, maid of honor, huh? Guess you'll be busy tomorrow." I frowned, taking the card from him. My name, Elowen Harper, was printed neatly, but beneath it, in bold type, it read, "Maid of Honor." My stomach clenched. My hands shook slightly as I held it, but I refused to let them see. Behind me, I heard soft laughter. Seraphine stood nearby, shrugging as if nothing mattered. "Oh, the printer must have messed up. Don't stress about it." The words hung between us like smoke. Guests chuckled uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact but unwilling to stand in silence. In Savannah, laughter was often sharper than an insult because it forced you into a corner where dignity was hardest to maintain. I smiled thinly, handed the invitation back, and forced myself to breathe evenly, but inside, a storm churned. I remembered a line I once read. "Once is an accident, twice is a pattern." My dress replaced, my name erased. This was no longer coincidence. That evening, I found myself alone in the bridal suite, staring at the ragged gown folded over the chair and the misprinted invitation on the table. The lamp cast shadows that stretched across the walls, making the room feel smaller, tighter. Earlier, I had spoken with my fiancé about it. He'd laughed lightly, brushing a hand against my arm. "Don't sweat the small stuff, babe. It's just details. Nobody cares about labels." Nobody cares. That phrase rang in my ears like Seraphine's voice earlier. But I cared. These weren't just details. They were attempts to strip me of my place, piece by piece. I picked up the small velvet box holding the necklace my mother left me. Cool against my palm, it steadied me. "If I don't pay attention now," I whispered, "I'll regret it tomorrow." It wasn't panic that filled me. It was resolve. For too long, I had endured Seraphine's games. She wanted me silent, embarrassed, uncertain. She wanted me to walk into tomorrow already broken. But she didn't understand. I wasn't surrendering. I was preparing. By nightfall, the cicadas had taken over the soundtrack of Savannah, their steady song rising through the warm air. I sat in the dim bridal room, the wrong dress staring back at me like an accusation, the wrong name burned into paper on the desk. The air felt thick with warning. These weren't mistakes, weren't slips of paper or misplaced garments. They were rehearsals for something worse. I smoothed my hand over the fabric, every thread scratching against my palm. My mother's words echoed in my memory. "Remember which side family stands on." For the first time, I understood exactly what she meant. From the hallway, laughter drifted, carefree, cruel in its ignorance. I sat straighter, my pulse steadying with a new kind of clarity. "Something bigger is coming," I whispered. "These are just the opening shots." I didn't know then that tomorrow I'd be shoved into a pot of boiling soup. I didn't sleep much after the dress and the invitation fiasco. The house was dark, but my mind was lit with every detail, every smirk, every shrug that told me what I needed to know. This wasn't carelessness, it was sabotage. By morning, I tried to steady myself with coffee at the kitchen table. The air smelled of roasted beans and humidity, a reminder that the day would only get heavier. I replayed Seraphine's voice in my head, that tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Accidents happen, nobody will notice." But in Savannah, everybody noticed. In towns like mine, reputation was like glass. Once cracked, no amount of smoothing could erase the lines. People didn't forget, they only whispered. I could almost hear those whispers already. "Did you see her dress? Did you notice the invitation?" I knew those murmurs would spread faster than I could walk down the aisle. When I tried to share my unease with my fiancé over breakfast, he only smiled, brushing my concern aside. "Don't let it ruin your vibe, Elowen. This is supposed to be fun. You're overthinking it." He kissed my cheek quickly, distracted, already scrolling through emails on his phone. I felt the isolation sink deeper. It wasn't just that Seraphine seemed set on dismantling me piece by piece. It was that the one person I thought would defend me didn't even see the cracks forming. Or worse, he saw them and didn't care. I carried that silence into the late morning, determined to protect the few things that still felt mine. That was when I went upstairs to check on my mother's necklace. The jewelry box sat on my dresser, right where I always kept it. Small, worn, with the hinges just a bit loose from years of opening and closing. I had polished the silver chain just last week, preparing to wear it tomorrow. That necklace wasn't just an accessory. It was the only piece of my mother I had left. She'd worn it during her last Christmas with us, her hand warm against mine as she said, "The measure of love is respect, Elowen. Don't ever let anyone teach you otherwise." When I lifted the lid, my breath stopped. The velvet lining was empty. I rifled through the box, my hands trembling, hoping it had slipped beneath the folds. Nothing. The chain was gone. A hole opened in my chest, sharp and hollow. Losing it now felt like losing her all over again. The door creaked, and Seraphine appeared almost too quickly, as if she'd been waiting for the cue. Her eyes widened, voice coated in honey. "Oh no, don't tell me it's missing. Maybe the jeweler misplaced it?" She tilted her head, feigning concern, but she wasn't fooling me. No jeweler touched this, I said, my voice low but steady. She raised her hands in mock surrender. I'm just saying. It could have been anyone. Don't jump to conclusions. Her words curled around the room, but I caught the flicker in her eyes, the satisfaction she couldn't quite hide. I wanted to scream, to accuse, to pull the truth from her lips. Instead, I closed the box gently, keeping my expression calm. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a shield. Inside, though, fury clawed at me. Respect had long been absent in this house. My mother's measure of love had been shattered by the games played here. And now, even her memory was being stripped from me. By noon, relatives filled the house for brunch. The smell of biscuits and sausage gravy filled the dining room, plates clattering, conversations weaving through the air. I sat quietly at the table, forcing bites past the knot in my throat. That's when I heard it, soft whispers behind me. I turned slightly and caught Seraphine leaning toward my fiancé. Her lips curved in a half-smile as she murmured, "She'll make a mess of it. She always does." His response wasn't words, but laughter, soft, but sharp enough to cut through me. Their eyes flicked in my direction before they leaned back, sharing the joke between them. A cousin across the table chuckled awkwardly, as if to mask the discomfort, but his laughter only deepened the humiliation. My own family, my own fiancé, conspiring in humor at my expense. I sipped my coffee, steadying my hand so it wouldn't shake. I told myself, silence can be stronger than shouting, because shouting would give them what they wanted, proof that I was fragile, that I was losing control. But inside, my chest burned. This was no longer sabotage dressed as accidents. This was cruelty disguised as family humor. I listened to their laughter trail off, my eyes fixed on the plate in front of me. Every sound in the room, clinking forks, rustling napkins, felt amplified against my humiliation. Later, when the crowd thinned and the house quieted, I retreated to my room. The wilted substitute bouquet, delivered that afternoon, rested on the desk. Roses browned at the edges, stems tied haphazardly. Another mistake, another theft of dignity. I sat with it, my thoughts circling like storm clouds. Every so-called accident was stripping away pieces of me. My dress, my name on the invitation, my mother's necklace, now even the respect owed to me in conversation. It wasn't just about tomorrow's ceremony, it was about my identity, my place, my legacy. In America, weddings are more than ceremonies. They are statements of respect, a symbol of continuity, a marker that family names are carried forward. Mine was being rewritten by those who claimed to love me. I clenched the ribbon around the bouquet. I may look quiet, but I am not weak. My reflection in the mirror stared back, eyes tired but fierce. The first spark of resistance lit within me. Maya Angelou's words came to mind. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. They had shown me, over and over, and I was done ignoring it. As dusk crept in, I stood by the window, looking out at the town that had raised me and the family that had nearly broken me. The bouquet sat wilting on the desk, a cruel stand-in for the day ahead. If they can erase my name, my dress, my mother's memory, what will they erase next? I whispered into the quiet. The thought settled heavy in my chest. Tomorrow wasn't just about vows or rings. Tomorrow would reveal exactly how far they were willing to go. The morning's tension carried into the afternoon like a storm cloud refusing to break. After the necklace disappeared and the whispers over brunch dug into me, I began to recognize the pattern clearly. My dress had been swapped, my name printed wrong, my mother's heirloom stolen. Now, each slight didn't stand on its own. They stacked like bricks building a wall meant to corner me. In the South, people say family feuds don't stay private. They get baked into the cornbread at Sunday dinner, carried in stories, handed from one relative to the next. That was what I felt happening to me. Every humiliation wasn't just aimed at me, it was designed to be retold, laughed over, remembered. I stayed silent that afternoon, letting the house buzz with visitors. My aunts moved from kitchen to parlor, setting platters down, fussing over china, while cousins darted in and out. On the surface, it looked like a family preparing for a joyous wedding. Underneath, I felt the teeth of their gossip already biting. I chose silence, not because I was defeated, but because I wanted to see how far they would go. My mother always told me that anger was loud, but strength was steady. So I steadied myself, bracing for what came next. The delivery van pulled up just after lunch. I stood by the window, waiting, because if there was one detail I had insisted on controlling, it was the bouquet. I had chosen roses bound with a satin ribbon my mother once embroidered, a way to carry her into tomorrow. When the florist's boy carried the arrangement inside, my heart leapt for a moment. But as he set it down on the table, the air drained from my chest. The roses were wilted, brown at the edges, petals drooping. The stems were tied carelessly, half of them uneven. I stared at it. "This isn't what I ordered." He shrugged nervously, muttering something about mix-ups at the shop before rushing out. Behind me, I heard the rustle of silk. Seraphine walked in, her timing perfect as always. She leaned over the bouquet, making a sympathetic noise. "Oh, that's too bad, but don't worry, under the lights, no one will notice." Her words, once again, were sharp, disguised as soft. I touched the ribbon and realized it wasn't even the one I had sent to the florist. The embroidered one from my mother was missing. That detail sliced deeper than any drooping petal. My aunt glanced at it from the doorway, muttering to another, "Looks cheap, like she couldn't afford the real thing." Their voices weren't whispers, they were pitched just loud enough for me to hear. I clenched the bouquet in my hand, feeling the thorns press lightly against my skin. Inside, I made a vow. Every time they tried to shrink me, I would grow quieter, but sharper. These weren't errors, they were deliberate wounds. Each one meant to bruise my pride before the ceremony. I held the bouquet high, forcing a smile. "It will do," I said aloud, because I refused to give Seraphine the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. She arched a brow, clearly disappointed that I hadn't crumbled. Later in the afternoon, relatives gathered in the living room, balancing paper plates on their laps. The television murmured in the background, ignored in favor of chatter. I lingered by the doorway, hoping for a moment of peace. Then laughter erupted from a cluster of cousins. One of them passed a phone around, eyes sparkling with amusement. I felt the knot tighten in my chest before I even saw the screen. When the phone landed in my lap, my stomach dropped. It was a video, a secretly recorded clip of me during my first dress fitting months ago. I had tripped slightly stepping off the platform, the hem catching under my shoe. The camera had caught the stumble, freezing me in an unflattering posture. Across the bottom of the video, someone had typed, "Bride or blooper reel." The room filled with chuckles. My fiancé smirked from the corner, shaking his head, but not once stepping forward to defend me. He let the laughter wash over me like it was nothing. Seraphine, sitting near him, pressed a hand to her forehead, pretending embarrassment. "You know Elowen," she said sweetly. "Always clumsy." Heat crawled up my neck. That moment had been private, just me, a seamstress, and Seraphine standing in the corner. For it to appear here, now, meant only one thing. She had recorded it and waited for the perfect moment to humiliate me. I looked around the room. The faces of my relatives split between amusement and awkward guilt. No one stopped it. No one said, "That isn't fair." In that moment, I felt stripped bare. Respect isn't given. It's either earned or stolen, and mine had just been stolen in broad daylight. I slid the phone back onto the table, refusing to let them see me falter. My hands folded in my lap, but my mind roared. If this is what they call family, then family has failed me. As evening crept closer, I retreated upstairs with the wilted bouquet in hand. The laughter still echoed through the walls, but I let the silence wrap around me. I sat at my desk, tracing the frayed ribbon with my thumb, connecting the dots, the missing dress, the misprinted invitation, the stolen heirloom, the wilted bouquet, the leaked video. Each act deliberate, each one carving away at who I was supposed to be. They weren't just sabotaging a wedding, they were sabotaging me. I stared into the mirror, meeting my own eyes. "Silence can only last so long," I whispered. "There has to be a response." Humiliation twisted into a seed of defiance. For the first time, I felt something stronger than sorrow, a clarity that survival meant action. I recalled Rollo May's words. The opposite of courage is not fear, it's conformity. I had conformed for too long, endured too many slights in the name of keeping peace. Now I knew the peace had been false all along. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, I stepped outside into the thick Georgia air. The bouquet sagged in my hand, petals falling to the porch floor. The cicadas hummed their relentless chorus, the soundtrack of my childhood summers. I held the bouquet tightly, my lips forming the words I hadn't dared to say aloud inside. If this is war, I won't enter it unarmed. The house behind me still carried laughter, but mine had gone quiet, sharpened into resolve. I didn't know it yet, but tomorrow I would be shoved into a pot of boiling soup. By the time the sun began to drop behind the moss-draped oaks, the air had thickened to something almost solid. Georgia evenings carried a weight of their own, warmth, humidity, and a kind of heaviness that sank into the chest. After the wilted bouquet and that humiliating video replayed for the family, I no longer fooled myself into believing these were coincidences. Every slip, every error, was a calculated move. In small towns, weddings aren't just about love, I muttered to myself as I pinned my hair up in the mirror. They're performances, and someone is trying to write me out of the script. When I walked into the church hall for the rehearsal, laughter bounced off the paneled walls, sharp as silverware against porcelain. Children darted between tables while aunts adjusted centerpieces. On the surface, it was the usual chaos before a big southern wedding. But under it, I could feel the tension, a subtle hum vibrating beneath every smile. My shoulders stiffened. Unease had shifted into readiness. I wasn't just bracing anymore. I was preparing. We moved into the sanctuary where the lighting crew ran tests. I smoothed my dress as I stepped up to the front, imagining the glow I should have been standing in tomorrow. The main spotlight flicked on. Only it didn't land on me. It swung to Seraphine, illuminating her perfectly as though she'd rehearsed for this very moment. "Oh, looks like the star has arrived," an uncle quipped, and laughter spread through the pews. I turned to the technician, heat rising in my face. "Excuse me, that light is supposed to be for me." The man flipped through his notes, confused but not apologetic. "Your sister gave us instructions earlier. Said the bride wanted the focus split." Seraphine tilted her head, hand resting dramatically on her chest. "Oh, Elowen, maybe it's just a mix-up. Don't worry, we'll share." Share. As if my own wedding were her stage, her applause to borrow. I forced my hands to stay still at my sides, though inside, every muscle screamed. The laughter behind me grew, and I felt my skin prickle. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I swallowed it all, thinking I felt the heat of that light on her face, as though it was burning my own. Someone once told me, "You don't get respect by accident, you get it by taking it back." The words lodged in my chest, waiting. Afterward, we walked into the fellowship hall for the dinner rehearsal. Tables were lined with mismatched chairs, the smell of roasted chicken and sweet tea filling the space. My stomach tightened as I scanned the place cards. My name wasn't at the head table. It wasn't near the front at all. I found it tucked against the far wall, beside the kitchen doors, the table itself set with chipped china and plastic utensils that didn't match the polished silver everywhere else. I stood frozen, bouquet of fake flowers in the center, the kind you'd buy at a discount store. Meanwhile, Seraphine's name card gleamed at the head table, right beside my fiancé. The two of them already leaned in toward one another, their laughter carrying. A cousin whispered near my ear, "Isn't that supposed to be the bride's seat?" I clenched my fists. Every instinct screamed to flip the table, to shout until their faces burned with the shame they deserved. But I sat down in the chair that creaked under me, forcing calm into every gesture. Seraphine swept past me, her perfume thick, leaning close enough to whisper, "Don't take it personally, little sister. Placement isn't everything." She gave my shoulder a patronizing pat before gliding back to the front. I gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood. My mother's voice returned, steady as always. "Dignity isn't loud, it's steady." So I steadied myself. Outwardly, I stayed quiet. Inside, I began to sharpen my edges. If they wanted me seated like a guest at my own wedding, I would bide my time until I could turn the stage back on them. The rehearsal droned on, voices rising and falling, dishes clattering, speeches made in jest, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing it together. Every humiliation was meant to condition me into silence, every slight a rehearsal for something bigger. They wanted me broken before tomorrow, trained into submission. Instead, I reframed it. Silence wasn't my weakness, it was my strategy. They think I'm a guest at my own wedding, I told myself, eyes fixed on Seraphine's glittering smile as she sipped wine at the head table. But tomorrow, I'll show them whose name is really on this day. Anger no longer burned wild. It burned controlled, channeled, as if every insult had turned into kindling waiting for the right spark. When the rehearsal finally ended, I walked slowly toward the exit, past the cheap table that mocked me. My hand brushed across the worn wood one last time. Guests laughed behind me, voices fading. "If they want a show," I whispered into the heavy night air outside, "I'll give them one." I didn't know the next act would involve scalding soup on my skin. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for families to laugh together, to raise glasses, and to breathe before the big day. Instead, when I walked into the church hall that evening, I felt the same weight that had been building for days pressing down harder. The sting of yesterday's wilted bouquet and that shameful video still clung to me like a stain that wouldn't wash out. And tonight, they had planned more. I scanned the tables, each one dressed in linen cloths and polished silverware, with centerpieces glowing in the candlelight. Voices hummed, laughter lifted, and yet when I searched for my name, my heart sank. My place card wasn't at the head table, it wasn't anywhere near the front. I found it tucked at the far side of the room, squeezed against the wall by the restroom doors. The table was smaller, covered with a cloth that didn't even match the others. The chairs were old metal ones, the kind used for Sunday school, not for brides. And the centerpiece wasn't flowers, it was a plastic bowl filled with cheap mints. Guests nearby exchanged looks, some smirking, some uncomfortable. One uncle tried to turn it into a joke. "Well, at least it's convenient for bathroom breaks, right?" Laughter bubbled around the table, not cruel exactly, but complicit. I lowered myself into the chair, the metal groaning beneath me, and forced a smile that felt brittle. Inside, I felt the sting sharper than any words could cut. My role as bride was being rewritten, turned into a side character in the very story I was meant to lead. Seraphine passed by then, her perfume heavy, her lips curled in feigned surprise. "Oh, Elowen, I didn't do the seating chart," she said innocently. "Maybe someone mixed things up." I looked her in the eye and answered softly, "You always do find a way to be at the center, don't you?" Her smile froze just slightly before she walked away, satisfied with my humiliation. I sat quietly, listening to the chatter around me. I thought of my mother's words again, the ones she'd whispered when I was younger. Dignity is not negotiable. She had taught me that even when stripped of position, stripped of wealth, stripped of support, dignity had to remain. And yet here, in front of everyone, mine was being bartered away by my own blood. I debated walking out. I could have left then, found an excuse, but something held me in my chair. Leaving would have given Seraphine her victory, proof that I was fragile, that I couldn't endure. So I stayed, silent but deliberate, watching, waiting. My silence grew heavier as the evening rolled on, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone preparing. Later in the evening, after dinner plates were cleared and coffee was poured, the MC, Sable, a longtime friend of Seraphine's, clapped her hands for attention. "Now, we'd love to hear from our loved ones." A few short tributes to the bride and groom before tomorrow. People rose one after another, some offering lighthearted jokes, others speaking of memories. Laughter rang, glasses clinked, and with each word, I waited for my chance. Finally, Sable nodded to me. "And now, let's hear from our bride." I stood, legs steady beneath me, despite the pounding in my chest. The microphone hummed in my hand as I raised it. For the first time in days, I felt the chance to speak, to reclaim just a fraction of what they had stolen. "I want to thank you all for being here," I began, my voice carrying. "And I want to thank my mother, though she isn't with us, because everything I am, Everything I hope to be tomorrow, I owe to her. She taught me that. The microphone cut. The room fell silent for a beat. Then music swelled through the speakers, light jazz filling the air as if nothing had happened. I tapped the mic, tried again. Nothing. Sable swept in quickly, smiling too brightly. Thank you, Elowen. That was beautiful. She turned toward the next speaker. Now let's hear from... Polite clapping rose around the room. Some relatives looked down at their hands, embarrassed. Others whispered to each other. And across the room, Seraphine smiled faintly, her lips curved in satisfaction. It wasn't just humiliation. It was erasure. My dress, my name, my mother's necklace, my bouquet. And now even my words about her legacy were being cut off, stolen, and silenced. I stood there for a moment longer, microphone still in my hand, my throat tight. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I straightened my back and handed it back calmly, my silence louder than any protest could have been. In my head, the thought came clear. You can silence my voice, but you can't silence the truth. When the tributes ended and the music returned to background chatter, I slipped away, finding a quiet hallway off the side of the fellowship hall. My breath came slow and measured as I leaned against the wall. The necklace was gone, the bouquet wilted, the table by the restroom, and now my words erased. This wasn't just cruelty, it was the final line crossed. I thought of another line I'd read once. When you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. My mother would have agreed. And I realized I had been standing too quietly, too long. My sorrow began to sharpen into anger, but not the kind that lashes out, the kind that plans, the kind that waits. I told myself, I'll endure one more day, just one more, but not with passive silence. They don't realize the quietest person in the room can be the most dangerous. Resolve settled into me like steel. Tomorrow, they thought, would be theirs to control, but tomorrow was mine to reclaim. I returned to the hall briefly, offered excuses about needing rest, and excused myself from the table. Outside, the Savannah night was thick with humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees. I drew in the heavy air, let it fill my lungs, and whispered to myself, they think tomorrow is theirs to control. I closed my eyes, gripping the strap of my bag. But when the soup pot tipped over me, their plan burned hotter than they ever expected. By noon the next day, the church hall was buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes before a wedding. Long buffet tables were laid out with fried chicken, casseroles, biscuits, and the largest pot of soup I had ever seen steaming at the center. The smell was rich, almost comforting, but every time I looked at it, my stomach tightened. Relatives milled about, voices bright but sharp beneath the surface. Aunts traded compliments about dresses, then whispered criticisms when backs were turned. Cousins clumped together, phones out, already filming moments for social media. Southern hospitality, I thought, could be the sharpest knife. It cut while it smiled. I carried a plate in my hand, forcing myself to look composed. Every gesture was being watched. Every bite taken was fuel for gossip. After the humiliation of last night, sitting near the restroom door, cut off mid-tribute, I knew today would bring something worse. Their eyes followed me, not with love, but with anticipation. I walked slowly along the table, reaching for bread rolls, ladling a little salad. The soup pot steamed, a cloud rising into the air. I leaned forward, careful, but my instincts screamed before my body reacted. As I stepped past, I felt a sudden jolt against my ankle. My foot caught, my body pitched forward. The world tilted. I fell toward the enormous pot, the smell of boiling broth flooding my senses. The impact came fast. My arm and chest slammed against the edge, broth sloshing over me in a scalding wave. It seared instantly, clinging to fabric, eating through the thin layer to bite at my skin. Gasps erupted around me. Someone shrieked. A cousin muttered, "Oh my God!" A few nervous chuckles followed. People always laugh when they don't know what else to do. I stumbled back, clutching my arm, steam rising off my dress. My skin throbbed, raw and screaming. Seraphine's voice pierced the chaos, loud with mock horror. "Oh my God, Elowen, I didn't see you! I'm so sorry!" She crouched near me, her hand hovering as if she might help, but her eyes gleamed. I locked eyes with her. The apology was a mask, paper thin. She had stuck her foot out. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Inside, fury coiled tighter than the pain. It wasn't just soup. It was proof. Proof they would go as far as burning me alive to erase me. I searched the room for the one person who should have been running to me. My fiancé stood at the far end of the table, plate in hand. Relief flickered for half a second, until he laughed. He shook his head, lips curling into a smirk. "Don't be clumsy, babe." The words landed harder than the boiling broth. My chest clenched. Around him, a few guests tried to chuckle, joining in to soften the sting, but their laughter sounded hollow. Others shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. I stood there, dripping soup, the fabric heavy and sticky against my skin. The pain was sharp, but sharper still was the realization. He wouldn't defend me. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. I remembered a line I'd once read. The cruelest thing is not hatred, it's indifference. That truth pressed on me now. His indifference hurt more than any scar this soup might leave. I swallowed the scream in my throat, forcing my breathing to steady. My heart wanted to break, but my mind began to calculate. Don't cry, don't give them that. Think, Elowen, evidence, not tears. A few relatives rushed to help, offering napkins, muttering sympathy. I waved them off gently, straightening my spine. "I'm fine," I said, though the burn seared deep. I dabbed at my arm with the corner of a cloth, refusing to let my hands tremble. Silence settled over me, but it wasn't silence of surrender. It was silence sharpened into a blade. Inside, I vowed, "They think this will silence me." They don't know silence is my weapon. As I stood, I noticed a teenager near the back holding up a phone, recording everything. My pulse quickened. Proof. Even if they spun lies tomorrow, this moment was captured. Anger, once raw, shifted into resolve. I would not collapse here in front of them. I would not give Seraphine the victory of seeing me undone. This strike, the boldest yet, was not the end. It was the beginning. I turned, soup-soaked dress clinging, and walked slowly toward the exit. The hall buzzed with a strange mix of pity and gossip. Whispers followed me out. Poor thing. So embarrassing. Did you see her face? The night air hit me heavy, thick with Savannah's summer. I stood beneath the oak trees, chest heaving, arms still burning. I let the cicadas' steady hum drown out the voices behind me. This was their boldest strike yet, I whispered to myself. But mine is coming. And when proof of their cruelty surfaced, the world would finally see them for who they were. When I slipped out of the dining hall after the soup incident, the air outside clung to me heavier than the broth still staining my dress. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, a constant soundtrack of southern summers, but tonight their song felt like gossip, never-ending, loud, and sharp. Behind me, through the glass doors, voices swirled, some filled with pity, others too gleeful to be mistaken for sympathy. In the South, pity often tasted like poison. It wasn't offered to heal, only to feed stories that would be repeated on porches and at church potlucks. I knew what they were saying. Bless her heart, she can't even stay on her feet. Or worse, poor thing, maybe marriage isn't for her. The burn on my arm throbbed, but it no longer paralyzed me. Anger had taken the place of pain, shaping into something sharper, something I could control. I told myself I would not be the story they wrote about me. I would write my own. Inside the hall, I noticed movement. A girl, maybe 17, stood near the buffet line, her phone angled discreetly. Her name was Malis, a cousin's daughter, quiet and often ignored in the family shuffle. As people gasped and muttered during the soup accident, I realized her phone had been pointed straight at me. Later, when the crowd thinned, I caught her near the exit. "Milas," I said softly, my voice steady though my body still stung. She blinked, startled. "Yes, ma'am?" I lowered my voice. "Were you filming earlier?" Her cheeks flushed, eyes flicking to the floor. I didn't mean to. People were laughing, and it didn't feel right." "Do you still have it?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded, clutching her phone. "Don't delete it," I told her, my hand brushing her arm in thanks. "That video may matter more than you know." For the first time in days, a spark of hope broke through. Proof. I wasn't imagining things, wasn't overreacting. Seraphine could twist words, my fiancé could shrug away my pain, but a camera didn't lie. Truth is fragile, I thought, but once recorded, it's harder to erase. That recording meant my humiliation wasn't just rumor, it was evidence, but I also knew evidence was dangerous in a house where secrets were currency. The suspense curled inside me like smoke. Would Malus keep it safe, or would Seraphine find a way to silence even this? By late afternoon, as the luncheon wound down, I looked toward the doors, praying for the sight of my anchor, my best friend, Narina. She had promised to come, to stand by me through this storm. But as I stepped into the foyer, my heart sank. There she was, standing outside the glass doors, arguing with a man in a dark suit who clearly wasn't just a greeter. His arms were crossed, his posture rigid. "I'm on the list," she insisted, waving her embossed invitation. "You can't just keep me out." The guard shook his head. "Your name isn't on today's entry sheet. I've been instructed not to let you through." "Instructed by who?" Narina's voice cracked with disbelief. "You're making a mistake." I pushed open the door, but before I could step closer, Seraphine appeared behind me, her hand lightly touching my elbow. "Elowen, you shouldn't cause a scene. Maybe she just came on the wrong day." Her tone dripped with false concern, but her eyes glittered with victory. Narina's gaze met mine through the glass. Her expression carried fury and apology all at once. She pressed her palm flat against the door, as if to bridge the space between us. "I'll find a way in," she called. "Don't give up, Elle." The guard moved to usher her away, and the door swung shut between us. I stood frozen. Seraphine had taken my dress, my name, my mother's heirloom, my bouquet, even my voice last night when the microphone was cut. And now, she was taking my lifeline, cutting off the one person who refused to play her game. Inside, I thought bitterly. They wanted me alone because alone is easier to break. But as Narina disappeared from view, I felt something stronger than despair rise in me. If they thought isolation would end me, they had underestimated the quiet fire that had been building all along. I walked back into the hall, the soup stain still clinging to my dress, my skin still burning under the fabric. But my mind was clearer than it had been in days. I now had two things that Seraphine couldn't erase: the camera footage of the soup incident and the promise of Narina's loyalty, even if she was kept outside for now. Those were my anchors. With them, I began to shift from merely surviving to planning. I repeated to myself the words of Martin Luther King Jr. that I once read in a borrowed book. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." I didn't know how long it would take, or how much more I would have to endure before it bent my way. But I believed, for the first time in this nightmare, that justice wasn't just a dream, it was waiting, if I stayed steady. Hope and anxiety tangled together in my chest. The suspense wasn't just for the audience in that hall, it was for me. As I glanced across the room, I saw Seraphine leaning close to my fiancé, her laugh ringing like glass. Their heads bent together, as if nothing had happened, as if boiling soup and blocked doors were trivial. I clenched my fist under the table, nails digging into my palm. "You think you've won because my friend is outside," I whispered under my breath. "But I'm not done yet." When the reception began, I promised myself they would learn silence could turn into fire. The reception hall glowed with chandeliers, their light bouncing off polished floors and crystal glasses. White linens draped the tables, soft jazz hummed from the speakers, and flowers lined the edges of the stage. On the surface, it looked like perfection, a southern fairy tale with every detail curated for appearances. But as I stepped inside, my long sleeves hiding the burn marks from the soup, I knew this beauty was just a curtain. Behind it waited the next blow. Every step I took across the glossy floor felt rehearsed, as though I were walking into a performance staged by someone else. My reflection on the windows reminded me of how carefully I held myself upright, refusing to let the pain in my arm show. Inside, the thought curled sharp. Southern receptions aren't about love, they're about politics. And tonight, the stage was set to erase me. The air buzzed with chatter, relatives calling out greetings too cheerful, their eyes flicking with curiosity. Aunts whispered behind napkins, cousins snapped photos, and family friends murmured questions about the dress I wore instead of the gown they'd expected. Their smiles never reached their eyes. The anticipation was heavy, as if they were waiting for another spectacle, and I sensed it was already planned. When I reached for my seat, the truth hit harder than the soup ever had. My place card was not at the head table where the bride belonged, beside the groom, in front of the crowd. It was at a small table in the corner, surrounded by children still learning how to sit still and distant relatives who hardly remembered my birthday. I stood there a moment, staring at the card with my name printed clearly, set between crayons and juice cups. The whispers began immediately. "Isn't the bride supposed to sit with her groom?" one guest muttered. Another chuckled softly. "Maybe she gave her spot up. That sister of hers seems to fit the stage better." At the head table, Seraphine sat confidently, draped in a gown of her own choosing, planted right beside my fiancé. Their posture leaned toward each other, their laughter spilling into the microphone that hadn't even been switched on yet. I forced a polite smile, lowering myself into the chair, though every muscle in my body tensed. Children fidgeted around me, spilling water, bumping elbows, while I clenched my hands in my lap. Inside, fury burned steady. They weren't just moving me from the table, they were moving me out of the story. Later, when the plates cleared, the MC, Sable, clapped for attention. "Let's hear from our guest tonight," she said brightly. "A few words of love for the happy couple." Guests stood one after another, offering stories, jokes, blessings. The applause rose and fell with each. My heart raced, knowing my turn would come. Finally, Sable smiled toward me. "And now, let's hear from our bride." I rose, steadying my breath, microphone in hand. For the first time, I felt ready to take space, to reclaim what had been stolen. I lifted my eyes to the room. "I want to thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear. "This wedding is not just about two people. It's about family, about perseverance, about the legacy of those who shaped us. My mother—" The microphone cut out. Silence hit like a stone. Then the speakers crackled, and background music swelled, a smooth jazz number filling the hall. I tapped the mic, tried again. Nothing. Sable stepped in quickly, smiling wide. "Thank you, Elowen. That was beautiful. Now let's hear from our radiant Seraphine." Applause rose, polite but pointed. Seraphine stood gracefully, the spotlight following her, her speech polished, her words perfectly crafted. She thanked the guests, spoke of love, of dreams, of family support. Each phrase twisted the knife deeper. I sat back down slowly, my fingers tight around the mic's cord. They thought cutting the mic would silence me. They forgot silence can echo louder than words. When the speeches ended, the lights dimmed for the slideshow. My chest tightened as the first images flashed across the screen. Not the elegant engagement photos we had taken months ago, but awkward snapshots from my childhood. Me with braces, me tripping at a middle school recital, me spilling a drink on myself at a graduation party. The room erupted in laughter. I sank lower in my chair, fury searing through humiliation. Guests chuckled, some glancing at me with half-hearted sympathy, others reveling in the joke. Then came the worst. The screen shifted to recent photos, edited poorly but clear enough. My fiancé and Seraphine sitting close together, laughing, their faces turned toward each other in a way no bride should ever see. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some laughter stopped, replaced with uneasy shifting. My eyes locked on the images, and my heart clenched. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure. They weren't hiding their alliance anymore. They were parading it in front of everyone. I gripped my seat, refusing to give them tears, refusing to give them the victory of seeing me collapse. If they're turning this into a circus, I thought, I'll make sure the finale isn't theirs. As the slideshow ended, I felt the heat in my cheeks, not just shame, but something stronger. Shame was transforming into fire. Pain is fuel if you know how to burn it. I sat taller, my face calm, though my hands trembled slightly in my lap. Tomorrow, they believed, would be their victory. But tomorrow, I knew, was my battlefield. No more silence that bent under their weight. My silence now was steel, waiting to strike. Applause followed Seraphine's speech, echoing through the hall. I joined in, forcing my hands together, my smile tight but deliberate. They thought they had reached their crescendo. This is their crescendo, I whispered softly to myself. Mine hasn't begun yet. And when the lights dimmed, I decided silence would end tonight. The applause from Seraphine's speech still rang in my ears when I sat back at the corner table, hands folded, smile fixed like porcelain. Around me, the room buzzed with laughter and gossip. My humiliation had become their entertainment. I could feel eyes lingering on me, their whispers brushing against my skin like gnats I couldn't swat away. Inside, I repeated the words to myself. They thought the night ended with my silence. They had no idea silence can turn into fire. The lights dimmed again, signaling the next part of the program. The projector was still on from the slideshow, its white glow hovering on the screen. Guests leaned back in their chairs, wine glasses raised, waiting for another set of curated images. They didn't know what was coming, but I did. Somewhere in this hall, Narina had found her way in. She had promised me she would, and I trusted her word more than anyone else's. Suspense coiled in my chest like a storm waiting to break. The screen flickered, and instead of the polished montage prepared by Seraphine's allies, the footage changed. A new video played, grainy, raw, but unmistakably real. Gasps filled the hall as the image showed me stumbling into the massive soup pot, broth splashing across my body. The crowd could see Seraphine's foot jutting subtly into my path, and the smug smile she tried to swallow afterward. Then came the sound, my fiancé's voice, clear and cruel over the noise. "Don't be clumsy, babe." The room erupted. Murmurs swelled like waves hitting the walls. Some guests covered their mouths. Others exchanged sharp glances, whispers rippling louder and louder. Seraphine leapt to her feet. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her laugh brittle. "It was just an accident." Her tone faltered as the video replayed in slow motion, showing every deliberate detail. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding but my face calm. Inside, vindication burned. For days I had endured humiliation cloaked as mistakes. Now there was proof. Truth doesn't need a microphone, I thought. It only needs to be seen. Guests turned their eyes toward me, some with pity, but more with dawning realization. Reputations shifted in real time. The tide was beginning to tilt, and for once, it wasn't in Seraphine's favor. But Narina wasn't finished. Another file loaded onto the screen. This time it wasn't video, it was screenshots, dozens of them, each projected larger than life for everyone to see. Text messages. Seraphine's name lit up in blue, my fiancé's in gray. Their words scrolled across the screen like daggers. "Make sure she sits near the restroom. She won't say anything. Change the bouquet. Something cheap will rattle her. Don't worry, she'll embarrass herself. She always does." Gasps turned into audible outrage. A woman at the front whispered sharply, "They planned this." A cousin muttered, "My God, this is evil." I felt my chest twist. Reading their words was like reopening every wound they had inflicted, only sharper now that the whole family saw it too. But alongside the devastation came something unexpected. Clarity. This wasn't my failure. This wasn't me being clumsy or overly sensitive. This was betrayal laid bare. I remembered Maya Angelou's line, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." They had shown me over and over. Now everyone else finally saw it too. I glanced at Seraphine. Her face had drained of color, her polished composure cracking. She hissed at the MC, demanding the projector be shut off, but the damage was done. My fiancé tried to stand, stammering, "These messages are out of context." But his words were drowned by the collective gasp that filled the hall. There was no context that could erase what they had conspired. Their scheme was written in black and white, undeniable. I rose slowly from my chair, not trembling, not broken, steady. My voice, though quiet, cut through the murmurs. "This is not the wedding I dreamed of," I said, eyes sweeping across the guests. "But it is the truth, and I won't apologize for showing it." A hush fell. For once, no one dared to laugh. Silence stretched, then a single clap echoed. An older aunt stood, her hands firm. Another relative joined, then another, until the applause rolled through the hall. Not everyone stood, but enough. Support, small but real, had shifted toward me. Inside, I felt it. The moment silence transformed into voice. Dignity wasn't lost. It had been reclaimed. I turned my gaze back to Seraphine and the man I had once planned to marry. They looked cornered now, caged by their own schemes. Seraphine's glare burned, her lips curled in a snarl. My fiancé avoided my eyes, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense like a child caught in a lie. I lowered my voice, speaking only loud enough for them to hear. You wanted a show. This is your finale. And in my heart, I knew. When the final act came, I would be the one holding the script. The air in the reception hall felt different after the projector went black. For the first time all evening, there was no laughter, no applause, no chatter bouncing across the walls. Instead, silence stretched across the room, heavy and unrelenting. It wasn't my silence anymore. It was theirs. I stood still, feeling dozens of eyes swing from me to Seraphine, and then to the man I had nearly married. Their expressions shifted like waves, first confusion, then shock, then pity. But the longer they stared, the more their pity turned into something sharper. Anger, not at me, but at them. I thought to myself, for once, the silence in the room wasn't mine. It was theirs. And with that realization, something in me settled. Vindication began to rise. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I could see relatives leaning toward one another, whispering harshly, lips pressed thin. Seraphine fiddled with her bracelet, her perfect mask cracking as beads of sweat dotted her forehead. My fiancé, no, the man I refused to call that anymore, shifted from foot to foot, his jaw tight, his eyes darting anywhere but at mine. Justice was coming, and I could almost feel its weight pressing against the walls. Then Narina's voice cut through. Calm, steady, but loud enough to command attention. She had stepped forward, a folder in her hand. There's something else you should see, she said, her gaze sweeping the hall. Seraphine snapped, Enough! This spectacle has gone too far. But Narina ignored her. She moved to the projector again and slid new files into place. The screen lit up with bank statements. Rows of transactions filled the wall, clear and undeniable. At the top of the page, a joint account under Seraphine's name and his. My name was listed too. Not as owner, but as the source of funds. Gasps tore through the room. What is this? An uncle barked. Narina explained simply, These are Elowen's savings. Money she set aside for this wedding, quietly transferred into an account controlled by these two. Murmurs rose louder, sharper, the words echoing like accusations. That's theft, someone yelled from the back. Another relative's voice followed. Stealing from your own sister? Seraphine stammered. This is a misunderstanding. My former fiancé tried to step in, raising his hands. It was for the future, for our home. You don't understand. But his voice broke under the crowd's fury. I looked at him and thought, love doesn't drain your bank account. It invests in you. This was never love. Guests began muttering about legal consequences, police, lawsuits, scandal. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others hissed under their breath. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was financial, tangible, criminal. I didn't need to say anything. The truth was louder than I could ever be. Then came the collapse. One by one, relatives began to rise from their seats. My aunt's voice, usually soft, carried clear across the room. We came here for Elowen, not for this circus. Uncle Robert stood too, his eyes cold. I won't sit here and watch this disgrace. The movement spread like a wave. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I had grown up around, stood, shook their heads, and walked out. Not a word was offered to Seraphine or the man beside her. They didn't even spare them a glance. The sound of chairs scraping back echoed louder than applause ever could. I watched as the hall emptied, footsteps fading, doors closing one after another. Some guests paused to squeeze my hand as they passed, murmuring quiet encouragement. "Stay strong, Elowen. We see the truth now." Others simply nodded, their silence its own form of loyalty. And then it happened. Seraphine and he were left under the chandeliers, isolated, exposed. Their empire of control had crumbled in a single night. I thought to myself, family honor isn't inherited, it's earned. And they had just bankrupted theirs. I didn't gloat, I didn't shout, I didn't need to. I stood tall, soup burns still visible beneath the fabric of my sleeve, but my dignity intact, unshaken. Turning toward Narina, I whispered, "Thank you for not letting me fight this alone." She squeezed my arm gently, her eyes fierce. "You deserved better all along." I looked back at Seraphine, her face pale, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. I looked at him too, his shoulders hunched, his mouth opening and closing without words. They tried to erase me, I thought, but in the end, they erased themselves. A quote returned to me, one I'd read long ago. "Justice may sleep, but it never dies." Carlyle's words felt carved into the air tonight. The justice I thought would never come had arrived. Not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but here, under chandeliers, in front of every witness who mattered. I let the silence stretch a little longer, savoring it before I finally spoke. My voice was steady, calm, almost soft. "The wedding is over," I said, not to the crowd, but to the two who had tried to destroy me. Their heads snapped toward me. "But my story isn't." I turned, my steps measured as I walked toward the doors. Each stride felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. Behind me, their desperation hung heavy in the air. Ahead of me, clarity spread wide like an open road. Tomorrow, I knew, would not be the life I had once planned, but it would be mine, chosen, unbroken, free. "Tomorrow," I whispered under my breath, "I will decide what kind of life begins when the lies finally end." Morning sunlight crept across the blinds of my small apartment, warm but almost too bright for eyes that had barely closed. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, yet for the first time in months, I woke up without dread clawing at my chest. My bed wasn't covered in rose petals. No breakfast tray sat beside me like in the bridal magazines. What I had instead was silence, plain and real, the kind that didn't demand anything of me. The phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Missed calls, voicemails, texts piling one after another. Some from relatives, some from numbers I didn't even recognize. And one message sitting at the top from him. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment before pressing delete. Yesterday, I lost a wedding. But I found myself. That thought came quietly, almost like a whisper, but it landed with the weight of truth. I stretched, my muscles aching, my arms still faintly stinging where the soup had burned me. Relief mixed with sorrow, a bittersweet blend that settled into my bones, the kind of ache that tells you something has ended for good. By mid-morning, the news had already spread through Savannah. In a town this size, gossip doesn't travel, it gallops. Churches, hair salons, corner diners, everywhere, people would be buzzing. The bride humiliated, the sister exposed, the fiancé disgraced. My phone lit up with more calls. Cousin Amelia left a message. "Elowen, we love you. We're behind you." Aunt Judith's voice trembled as she said, "You showed more courage than I ever could. Hold your head high." But there were just as many silences from people who'd chosen not to call at all. Silence can be its own kind of judgment, its own kind of gossip. Meanwhile, Seraphine's name was already rolling through church bulletins and supper clubs. I could picture it, women shaking their heads, whispering over sweet tea. "Did you hear what she did to her own sister?" In the South, reputation doesn't die quietly. It's dragged through every kitchen table conversation. And for once, I wasn't the one being dissected. Yes, the betrayal cut deep. But regret? None. Exposing the truth hadn't just freed me from them. It had freed me from pretending. Narina showed up around noon, arms full, biscuits, scrambled eggs, even a small container of grits. She kicked the door shut with her foot, setting everything down on the kitchen counter. "You looked like steel under those chandeliers," she said, handing me a plate. I laughed, though it cracked a little at the edges. Steal? I felt like I was breaking. That's the trick, she replied, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. You can break inside all you want, but if you stand tall on the outside, no one can tell the difference. And last night, you didn't just stand, you owned the room. We sat at the table, the smell of butter and coffee grounding me more than any pep talk could. I thanked her for her loyalty, for risking her own reputation by stepping forward with that footage. She shrugged. Sometimes family isn't blood. It's who shows up when the world turns against you. And I wasn't about to let you stand alone. We talked about the bank account, about the theft of my savings. Narina suggested I could take legal action, maybe even press charges. But as we talked it over, both of us realized the greater justice had already been served. Their crime wasn't hidden. It had been laid bare before the entire community. And in Savannah, public exposure cuts deeper than any lawsuit. We sat in quiet agreement, sipping our coffee, the bond between us solid as oak. Later, alone again, I sat by the window and let my thoughts stretch further than the walls of my apartment. For years, my silence had been mistaken for surrender. They thought my quiet meant weakness. They didn't see it for what it was: preparation. I whispered aloud, just to hear it. They thought my silence meant surrender. They didn't see it was preparation. The pain was still there, but I began to see it differently, not as a weight dragging me down, but as resistance training, something that had forged me. I thought about my late mother, about her words that had carried me through every humiliation. Dignity is not negotiable. I had clung to that, even when my dress vanished, when my name was erased from invitations, when soup burned my skin, when my voice was cut off. And now, in the wreckage of what was supposed to be my wedding, I still had that dignity, untouched. I decided then that my path forward wouldn't be built on revenge or bitterness. It would be built on reclaiming myself. I would keep teaching music, pouring love into the students who actually valued what I gave. I would play piano again, not for ceremony or performance, but for me. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a cage. It looked like possibility. As the afternoon faded, I opened the door and stepped outside. The crisp Georgia morning had shifted into the softer warmth of midday, the kind that smells faintly of pine and fresh-cut grass. The air felt new, the kind of air you notice when you've just survived a storm. I breathed it in, slow and steady, as if claiming it for myself. I didn't need a groom. I didn't need my sister's approval. What I needed, what I finally had, was myself, and she was enough. That night, I sat at my piano. My fingers trembled at first, unsure, but then the keys welcomed me like an old friend. I played, not for an audience, not for applause, not for anyone's approval, just for me. And when the notes filled the room, they sounded like freedom. The wedding hall smelled of wilted flowers and spilt wine. Half the chairs were empty now, abandoned when the tide of relatives had risen against Seraphine and him. What lingered wasn't celebration, but smoke after a fire, thick, bitter, clinging to every breath. I stood facing them, calm as the chandeliers flickered above. They huddled together like cornered thieves, desperate to patch dignity onto bodies already stripped bare. They thought humiliation would end me, I told myself. They forgot. Survival sharpens into strength. I wasn't trembling anymore. The burns on my arms still throbbed, but the pain reminded me I was alive, unbroken. My voice, which they had silenced time and again, was finally mine. And tonight, I would not leave without saying everything they had tried to erase. Seraphine moved first. Her words came sharp, her voice breaking with rage. You destroyed this family's name. You stood there and aired every dirty secret we had. Do you have any idea how people will talk about us? You'll be the ruin of all of us. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with the same entitlement she had carried since childhood. She needed me to be the weak one, the quiet one, the girl who swallowed insults like communion bread. He followed with his own poison, low and coaxing. We could have fixed this if you stayed quiet. You think anyone's going to want you now? You embarrassed yourself more than anyone. For a long moment, I let their words hang. I wanted every guest still in the room to hear how they twisted truth, how they weaponized guilt. Then, I spoke. Family isn't destroyed by truth, I said clearly, each syllable like a nail hammered down. It's destroyed by lies. Lies you two layered so thick you thought I'd suffocate under them. Seraphine's lips parted, but no sound came. The fiancé, ex-fiancé, shifted again, trying to find solid ground under his own betrayal. Silence protected you, I continued. But speaking freed me. The weight of my voice turned the hall heavy again. For once, it was their turn to stand in shame. I turned to the guests who remained, those who had stayed not for the food or the gossip, but for the truth. My burns were still visible, faint red under the sleeve I'd rolled back. My dress was stained, my hair undone, but my spine was straight, and my words carried farther than the chandeliers above. I want you all to remember something, I said. A wedding isn't worth celebrating if it's built on deceit. Dignity matters more than any dress, more than a table, more than the illusion of perfection. Faces around the room softened. Some nodded, others murmured agreement. I let the moment grow, then dropped the words that had been waiting at the back of my throat all night. Better no wedding than a life chained to betrayal. It landed like a stone in still water. Gasps, then silence, then the faintest ripple of applause that grew until it filled the room. Not a roar of celebration, but a steady rhythm of hands clapping, a recognition, a witness to my truth. Seraphine shrank back. He tried to argue again, but the sound of support drowned him out. They had lost their script, and the stage was mine. I walked to the table where the rings sat, still waiting for vows that would never be spoken. The gold band gleamed faintly under the lights. I picked it up, studied it for a moment, and then placed it back on the table. Not with anger, but with certainty. It wasn't mine anymore. It never had been. Turning to Narina, I smiled faintly. Thank you, I said softly. She shook her head. Don't thank me. You did this. You stood there when it mattered. I thought of everything I had carried, the missing dress, the vanished necklace, the wilted bouquet, the soup burning my skin, the laughter, the erased name. Every cut meant to bleed me dry. And yet, here I stood, more alive than either of them. Yesterday, I thought I was losing everything, I said, almost to myself. Today, I realize I lost nothing worth keeping. Thomas Carlyle's words returned to me like an echo. Justice may sleep, but it never dies. And tonight, it had awakened. The chandeliers above buzzed faintly, the last reminder of a celebration that had rotted from the inside. I took one final breath in that hall, letting the air of betrayal fill my lungs one last time, and then I turned toward the doors. Narina followed, phone in hand, recording my steps as though to seal this moment into history, not as the bride abandoned, but as the woman who walked away strong. The doors opened. Night air rolled in, cool against my skin. Savannah smelled of salt and magnolia, grounding me in a world that suddenly felt wide open. I didn't look back. I whispered, steady and sure. The wedding was over, but my story had just begun. Because sometimes the bravest I do isn't said at an altar. It's said to yourself,